spent so much time researching about that telecom stuff today, and I'll talk about it a bit later. I guess with the first things first, what did I read today? Some crazy stuff, but how about some lighter ones? This one sounds like there's a First Nation community wanting to introduce things like drones, making it a hub. This one says, Indigenous drone company eyes Mississauga First Nation for hub. Canoe wants to make the North Shore community an operations hub for its remotely piloted long-range cargo aircraft. It says here, an Indigenous company that's in the business of producing remotely piloted zero-emission light cargo aircraft to ship goods to rural and remote communities is pitching a partnership with a First Nation on Luke Heron's North Shore that would see the small community become a northern logistics hub for its operators. It says here, an Indigenous company that's in the business of producing remotely piloted zero-emission light cargo aircraft to ship goods to rural and remote communities is pitching a partnership with a First Nation on Lake Huron's North Shore that would see the small community become a northern logistics hub for its operations. Canoe, an Indigenous-owned company led by Mississauga of Scugog Island, First Nation in Southern Ontario, held a pair of community information sessions in Mississauga First Nation last week to inform band members of the proposal that's currently on the table. And according to them, it says the idea right now is to do a pilot project, demonstrate ourselves to the community, and as long as the community is continuing behind us, we'll proceed, said Dudek. But obviously we're there to serve the community and be guided by them, and that's the defining characteristics of our engagement. And it says so far they produced 11 remotely piloted aircraft. So that's good, I guess. Unfortunately, when I hear First Nations and drones, I can't help but to think of that story I read before where there was someone on an island, I believe, who was in a First Nations community and all that. It's so remote away from various places and he needed medicine, but because it's so expensive to get a helicopter to deliver it, unfortunately the person passed away because you have to make a choice, spend I guess tens of thousands of dollars or whatever it is to deliver that medicine, or basically just pass away, unfortunately, because you can imagine the hardship financially afterwards, correct? So in those cases a drone would have been beneficial, it would have saved lives, it's more, I guess, productive, it's cheaper, so that's good in that sense, I guess. It kind of made me wonder too, even with that story before, remember how they banned everything? For example, even model aircrafts around that area where they found those buried children in the schools? Because before when I started, I was wondering, okay, that might be the law for all Canadians, but how about for people on a reserve land, like First Nation people? Can they dictate their own, I guess, airspace laws per se within that area as well? So would it be completely different? Because early on, actually, I remember it was the First Nations community in Vancouver Island, I believe, when all these regulations and stuff came up with no flying around animals and so forth, they specifically welcomed drone operators to go to the area and to capture things like the wildlife with the drone, bears and all that. I believe they stopped doing it, but again, I mean, you wonder what is the difference there in terms of the regulations they make themselves on their own land when it comes to things like airspace. And what a terrible story this was. You heard how in places like China, they still have these zero COVID policies, locking people down and all that. Well, apparently they take it to the extreme because there's all these videos, for example, showing where people, it seems like they're welding the doors shut, for example, in buildings so people cannot get out, I guess for things like quarantine and all that. How could you do that, in my opinion? Now, some people may say, well, you have to and so forth to stop the spread. But apparently the tragic news of this is there was a building that was welded shut. That's what it seems like anyways. And it caught on fire. And because they shut all the doors and so forth like this, people actually passed away in the fire. So that's creating huge outrage. There's a lot of people actually protesting there now. It's kind of amazing too in that sense because again, this is China we're talking about, communist country. People are afraid to speak out about issues usually. So to have people actually go out and try to protest stuff like this now, that's kind of crazy. But again, who in their right mind thinks this is the right way to do things? I don't get it. Especially again, with all the facts and stuff that have come out. It's just that people are taking it, I guess, overboard. They don't want to give up power or something like that because that makes no scientific sense, honestly, from a medical standpoint, from everything I read, especially when they talk about things like natural immunity or the survival rates of how people can recover and all that. It doesn't make sense to lock people up like this. In my opinion, at the end of all this, when they find out all the facts, they turn out to be wrong scientifically and all that, and you lock these people down, they had their lives lost, they should be held accountable, in my opinion. And in terms of holding people accountable, I'm probably going to contact that CCTS again this week because, again, the last time I called them, they said, okay, maybe they made a mistake, so they need to review it with another department to see if they can do anything, which they should. And I was just researching a bit more about things like telecom laws and all that because to, I guess, quickly go over the situation again, my mom's phone was disconnected. They transferred the number for some reason. It was over a week. And then they signed her up for a 2-year contract. It seemed like they charged her money to revert it back to a no contract. And in these, I guess, disconnection codes in terms of the telecommunications law, according to this, it sounds like it should be a no-brainer, right? Where they violated the law per se. So in reading all this, apparently, if the line is disconnected because of things like non-payment, which wasn't the case here because they took her money, you still have to give them notice, for example, like it says here, at least 14 days prior to disconnection, unless there's an extreme circumstance. For example, they're doing something illegal or something like that, trying to scam others, which wasn't the case in any way here. They just disconnected it for some odd reason. And then here was the interesting part. It says, where it becomes apparent that the disconnection occurred in error or was otherwise improper, the company must restore the services during business hours on the next working day. At the latest, unless exceptional circumstances do not permit this, and no reconnection charges shall be levied. So as you know, it's been over a week, so isn't that a no-brainer if you're investigating this? Wow, over a week? And as well, since this has been going through an investigation, and like I said, for some reason, the line seems like it got disconnected at times still. It says the company may not disconnect the customer's services where there is a dispute regarding the basis of the proposed disconnection, provided the payment is being made for the undisputed portion of the services and the company does not have reasonable grounds for believing that the purpose of the dispute is to evade or delay payment. Again, as I mentioned, they took my mom's money, and with that advice from the credit card company, well, you could, for example, dispute it, but then they have control over, I guess, the number and the account because they can argue you didn't pay. So shouldn't that be a no-brainer here? So I'm trying to think because, as mentioned, and I'm going to consider the fact maybe this organization that's supposed to oversee the telecom companies, maybe there's some rotten apples in there. They're trying to be biased. At the moment, when I talked to them last time, they seemed really reluctant to actually say, write it down on paper or email to explain why they aren't fully investigating this company, because their only excuse so far is they were confused, it wasn't clear, they didn't understand the situation, so they kind of just left it and closed it at the moment. And I read all of their bylaws and mandates. There's nothing there that says, oh, we close basically cases we don't understand. It says, for example, they're supposed to go up to the customers, for example, or the complainant, try to determine exactly what is going on, and if they close it for any reason, they're supposed to communicate it immediately. For example, why they're not doing it. For example, maybe it's not within their legal ability, for example, but in this case, it seems like they do have the ability to hold the company accountable. So I'm thinking, how can I do this once I phone them to make sure? If they give me the excuse again saying, oh, no, we can't do this and that, and they refuse to actually give it to me on paper formally to say they refuse to investigate this, what's the best way to do that? Because in general, all I've been doing is just documenting everything thoroughly. Now, normally in these situations, I personally would be very patient, just documenting everything and so forth, because it's not like it's tens of thousands of dollars, but since it's affecting my mom's account and all that, it almost makes me wonder what else I could do potentially if it doesn't get resolved in that sense. Because this company, actually, funny enough, I was just researching about it, like the phone company. Apparently the CEO was arrested before, not too long ago. So wow, what kind of company am I dealing with here? And if it comes down to it, should I be talking to things like a lawyer potentially? That's what I'm wondering, actually. Or is that not how it works in these cases with these types of industry violations per se? Because I'm wondering too, if you do get like a lawyer and so forth, would it work out to they have to pay like the lawyer fees and stuff and all that too if you actually won? Because funny enough, remember how like I won things like that drone contest and all that, and there's a financial award? I usually say in life, if for some reason I get money like donations from people or out of nowhere like this, it's usually the way of the universe saying, there's something you have to do and it costs money. So it makes me wonder if I should be investing it into like a lawyer or something like that. Alright, see you guys later.